When I look back on those years in Florida, I sometimes wonder how life could turn so unexpectedly, and how love can slip through your fingers even when you try to hold it tight. I was a simple woman, living in a small town with dreams of raising a family and growing old beside the man I thought would never leave me. He was my husband, my partner, my confidant, and for years I believed we had something unshakable. We had a little house near the orange groves, and every morning I woke up to the smell of fresh blossoms carried by the warm Florida breeze. It was a life that looked ordinary from the outside, but to me it was filled with small joys, quiet moments, and the comfort of routine. I loved cooking for him, waiting for him to come home from work, sharing stories at the dinner table, and holding his hand when we went to church on Sundays. My best friend, who lived just down the street, was often around us too. She had been my friend since school days, and we had shared secrets, tears, and laughter through so many stages of life. She was the one I called when I was lonely, the one I leaned on when times were hard, and I trusted her more than anyone. Little did I know that the two people I cherished most would soon break my heart in ways I never imagined. It started with small signs that I ignored at first. My husband became distracted, always busy, always tired. He would say he had extra work, late meetings, or errands to run. I believed him because why wouldn't I? I had never doubted his loyalty. My best friend also began acting strangely, avoiding certain conversations, looking away when I asked casual questions. I thought maybe she was going through her own troubles and didn't want to burden me. I tried to be patient, thinking everything would balance out again, but deep inside I started to feel a heaviness, a worry I could not name. Then came the day when the truth spilled out like a storm that had been brewing behind quiet skies. I discovered them together, not by accident but because my heart pushed me to follow my instincts. It was a weekday afternoon, and I drove past her house on my way back from the store. His car was parked in her driveway. My hands trembled as I pulled over, and I told myself it must be nothing, maybe just a friendly visit. But I knew better. I knocked on her door, and when she opened it, there he was behind her, his face pale, his eyes wide, and in that moment the pieces of my life crashed to the ground. My husband confessed he had been seeing her for months, that he loved her now, that he couldn't pretend anymore. My best friend, with tears in her eyes, told me she hadn't planned for it to happen, but love had come like a thief and she could not resist it. I remember standing there, numb, unable to breathe, as if the Florida sun had suddenly turned cold. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand answers, but all I could do was walk away, my groceries still in the car, my heart breaking with every step. That night I sat in my empty kitchen, staring at the wall, listening to the silence that now felt so loud. I realized my marriage was over, my friendship was gone, and the world I had built around me had collapsed. The days that followed were heavy with sorrow. He moved out quickly, and soon he was living with her openly, as if what they had done was not betrayal but simply destiny. Neighbors whispered, people stared, and I carried the shame like a weight on my shoulders. I wanted to hate them both, but hate only deepened my wounds. I wanted to forget, but every corner of my life reminded me of what I had lost. For a while I thought I would never recover, that I would fade away into loneliness. But life has a way of surprising us, even when we least expect it. As time passed, I learned to survive without him. I went back to work, I joined a local church group, I found small comforts in baking pies for community gatherings and helping children with reading at the library. Slowly, the ache dulled, though it never disappeared. I thought I was finally moving on, building a life on my own. Then, one morning, my phone rang. It was her, my former best friend, the woman who had taken everything from me. I almost did not answer, but something inside me told me to pick up. Her voice was shaky, tired, and she asked me for help. She had children now, 2 little ones with him, and she needed someone she could trust to watch them while she worked. At first I was stunned. After all the pain she had caused me, how could she ask this of me? But she said she had no one else, that she knew I loved children, and that she would pay me for my time. I hung up without giving her an answer. For hours I sat in silence, thinking, wrestling with emotions. Part of me wanted to refuse, to tell her I owed her nothing. But another part of me remembered those children were innocent. They were not guilty of what their parents had done. They deserved kindness, not rejection. After a sleepless night, I called her back and said yes. That yes would change everything again, in ways I never expected. The first time I stepped into their home to babysit, my heart felt like it was being torn in two. Walking through that doorway, I saw pieces of my old life scattered in their new one. The furniture looked familiar because some of it had once belonged to me, things I had picked out during my marriage, now placed in her living room as if my memories had been stolen right along with them. I tried not to look too closely, tried to keep my eyes on the children, but I could not ignore the ache inside me. They greeted me shyly at first, 2 little ones with big curious eyes, innocent and unknowing of the history between their parents and me. The girl clung to her mother's leg, while the boy peeked at me from behind the couch. My former best friend spoke softly, almost nervously, giving me instructions about snacks, bedtime routines, and emergency numbers. I nodded, my hands trembling slightly, though I kept my voice calm. When she left for work, I stood there in the quiet house with the children, realizing this was the beginning of something I had never planned for. At first it was awkward, even painful. Every corner of that home whispered reminders of betrayal. I would see a photo of them together on the wall and feel a pang in my chest. I would hear his voice when he came home later at night, thanking me briefly before hurrying past, and I would feel a mixture of anger and sadness that I could not describe. But with each passing day, I found myself softening, not toward them, but toward the children. They were sweet, curious, and full of life. They did not know the story of how I had been hurt, and they looked at me not with judgment or pity, but with trust. The little girl, only 3 years old, liked to sit on my lap while I read picture books. She would trace the drawings with her tiny fingers and giggle at the silly voices I made. The boy, a little older, loved to ask questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Why do birds fly? Why do cookies taste better when they're warm? His questions reminded me of my own childhood, when curiosity was endless and life felt wide open. Slowly, through their laughter and innocence, my wounded heart began to feel a kind of healing I had not expected. Still, the situation was complicated. There were days when bitterness rose in me, days when I questioned why I was even there. Why should I give my time, my love, to the children of the man who had broken me and the friend who had betrayed me? But then I would see their little faces light up when I arrived, their arms reaching for me, and I knew the answer. It was not about him, or her. It was about them, the children. They deserved stability, care, and love, and if I could provide that, then maybe my pain could serve a purpose. In a strange way, babysitting them gave me back a sense of meaning. I was no longer just the woman who had been left behind. I was someone who could shape young lives, someone who could give them joy, someone who could still matter in this world. The neighbors who once whispered about the scandal now whispered about me in a different way. They said I was strong, that I had more grace than most people could imagine. Some asked me how I could do it, how I could look after those children without resentment. I never had an easy answer. All I could say was that love, in its truest form, does not hold grudges against the innocent. Love can flow even where hurt once lived. One evening, while I was putting the children to bed, the little girl hugged me tightly and whispered, "I love you." Those 3 words shook me deeply. It had been so long since anyone had said them to me with such purity, without conditions or betrayal. I kissed her forehead, tucked her in, and sat there beside her bed until she fell asleep, tears quietly rolling down my cheeks. That night I realized something important. My life had taken a turn I never asked for, but it had also given me a new family in a way I had never expected. They were not mine by blood, and the circumstances were painful, but the bond was real. Even their parents began to notice. My former best friend, though still distant and careful around me, occasionally expressed gratitude. She would say things like, "The kids really love you," or "I don't know what I'd do without your help." At first, those words felt hollow, but over time I saw sincerity in her eyes. She knew she had hurt me, and maybe this was her way of trying to mend something, even if it could never be whole again. As for him, my ex-husband, he remained mostly silent. He avoided long conversations with me, perhaps out of guilt or discomfort. But there were rare moments when our eyes met and I saw a flicker of regret. He never apologized, not in words, but I could see it lingering in his expressions. Still, I did not need his apology anymore. I had found strength beyond his choices, and I no longer measured my worth by his presence. Florida sunsets became my comfort during those days. After the children were tucked in and I returned home, I would sit on my porch and watch the sky turn golden, pink, and purple. I would breathe in the humid evening air and tell myself that every ending can carry the seed of a beginning. My heart was scarred, yes, but it was also open in ways I had never known before. Babysitting those children was not just a job, it was a journey back to myself, a reminder that I could still give and receive love even after betrayal. And little by little, day by day, I started to believe that maybe my story was not about what I had lost, but about what I had found through the most unexpected path. As time went on, the children became the center of my days, and without realizing it, they filled the emptiness that had been left behind when my marriage collapsed. They began to see me not just as a babysitter but as someone who belonged in their little world, someone they could run to with scraped knees, someone who would listen to their endless stories about imaginary adventures and favorite cartoons. I found myself smiling more, laughing more, even when my heart still carried scars from the past. It amazed me how healing could come from such small hands holding mine, from their innocent voices calling me by name, from the way they trusted me completely. There were moments, though, when the past tried to creep in. Sometimes he would come home early, walking through the door while I was helping the kids with their homework or preparing their dinner. The air would grow tense for me, heavy with unspoken words. I would remember the nights I once cooked for him in my own kitchen, the times I waited for his footsteps at my own door. Seeing him now in another house, with another family, was like pressing on an old wound. But instead of bitterness rising in me, I often felt a strange calm. He had chosen his path, and I had chosen mine, and perhaps that was how it was meant to be. The children were not to blame, and even he was no longer worth my tears. My best friend, the woman who had once been my closest companion, was still difficult to face. She would sometimes ask me questions as if searching for a bridge back to me. She would say, "Do you remember when we used to go to the beach at night and talk for hours? Or you always made the best cornbread. I wish I could cook like you." Her words were like shadows of a friendship that had died, and though I answered politely, I never let myself forget the betrayal. Forgiveness was something I wrestled with daily. Some days I felt I could forgive her, other days the wound felt too deep. Still, standing beside her children, I reminded myself that bitterness would poison me more than it would punish her, so I carried myself with grace even when my insides burned. The neighbors, once fascinated by the scandal, had grown used to the new arrangement. They no longer whispered when they saw me arriving at their house. Some even admired me openly, telling me I was stronger than most people could ever be. One elderly neighbor once stopped me on the sidewalk and said, "Child, you are teaching us all what love really looks like." I smiled, though inside I wondered if I truly believed that myself. Was it love, or was it just survival? Perhaps it was both. The children began to depend on me in ways I hadn't expected. When the boy had a school project, he asked me to help because he said I explained things better. When the girl was sick with a fever, she cried for me instead of her own mother. At first, I worried that this would cause tension, that my presence would blur the lines of their family, but then I realized it was simply a reflection of how deeply they trusted me. I became a safe place for them, and that responsibility filled me with both pride and humility. One summer evening, I took them to the park. The air was warm, filled with the smell of freshly cut grass, and the sound of children's laughter carried on the breeze. I watched them climb the slides and swing high into the sky, their joy spilling over like sunlight. As I sat on the bench, I thought about how life had twisted me into this place I never could have imagined. A part of me still longed for the life I had planned, the family I had dreamed of, but another part of me realized I was living something different yet still meaningful. The children were not mine by blood, but in many ways, they had become mine by heart. That evening, when we returned home, the little boy looked at me with wide eyes and asked, "Why do you help us so much?" I paused, my heart caught in my throat, and I told him gently, because sometimes helping others helps me too. He seemed to understand in his own childlike way and smiled, hugging me before running off to play. That night, as I lay in bed, those words echoed in my mind. Helping them was helping me. The truth was that through all my pain, I had found a new purpose. I had discovered a resilience I never knew I possessed. Even though my marriage had ended in betrayal and my best friend had turned into a stranger, I had chosen not to be destroyed. Instead, I had chosen to love in a different way, to pour my care into the innocent souls who needed me. And in return, they were unknowingly stitching my broken heart back together. Over time, I noticed subtle changes in myself. The bitterness that once clouded my mornings began to lift. I found joy in small things again, baking cookies with the children, teaching them songs from my childhood, watching their eyes light up at bedtime stories. I found myself humming as I washed dishes, smiling as I walked to church, laughing with the women in my community group. It was as if life had handed me ashes, but slowly, a few flowers began to bloom from them. Even my former best friend noticed. One day, as she returned home from work, she paused before paying me and said softly, "You seem happier now." I didn't think that would ever happen. I looked at her for a long moment, searching her face, and then simply replied, "Happiness is a choice, and I had to make it." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes, but neither of us said more. That was the closest we had ever come to acknowledging the past openly. Forgiveness was still far from my lips, but healing was quietly at work inside me. And so, with each day that passed, I began to believe more and more that this unexpected path was not a punishment but a strange blessing in disguise. Life had taken me where I never wanted to go, but it was there, in the heart of loss, that I found strength, love, and a new kind of family I never imagined would be mine. There came a time when I realized the children were not just a part of my days, but that I had become woven into the fabric of their lives. They began to ask for me even when I was not scheduled to come. If their mother told them I would arrive later, they would wait by the window, their little faces pressed against the glass, calling out my name the moment they saw me walk up the path. Their joy made the pain of my past feel smaller, though it never disappeared completely. I remember one particular morning when the little girl was upset because she could not find her favorite doll. She searched the entire house, her tiny hands pulling pillows from the couch, tears filling her eyes, until I finally found it tucked under the blanket in her bed. The way her face lit up when I handed it to her, the way she threw her arms around me, made me feel something I had thought I would never feel again, needed. It is a powerful thing to feel needed, especially after being discarded. I had been left behind by the people I trusted most, but here I was, being embraced by two children who loved me without conditions. It softened my heart and reminded me that even brokenness can be transformed into something good. Yet, with this closeness came complicated emotions. Sometimes I would lie awake at night, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Was I holding on to the children because I truly loved them, or was I clinging to them as a way to fill the emptiness left behind by my failed marriage? I asked myself these questions again and again, searching my heart for honesty. The truth I found was that yes, at first, maybe it had been about filling the void, but over time, it had grown into something real. I loved them simply because they were themselves. They made me laugh, they tested my patience, they kept me on my toes, and they reminded me that life could still hold sweetness even after betrayal. Still, there were moments when being in that house brought back painful memories. I would glance at the photos on the wall, family pictures of them smiling together, and a sharp ache would stab at me. That was once the life I dreamed of having, and now I stood on the outside, looking in. He rarely spoke to me beyond polite greetings, and sometimes I wondered if he avoided me because my presence reminded him of the choices he had made. On some evenings, when he came home late, I could hear him and her arguing quietly in the kitchen. Their voices were muffled, but the tension was clear. It struck me then that betrayal does not guarantee happiness, that the grass is not always greener, even when people believe it is. In some strange way, that realization gave me peace. I no longer envied them, because I could see that their lives were not perfect either. In fact, sometimes I pitied them, caught in their own struggles while I had begun to find freedom in mine. The children, however, shielded me from most of that heaviness. With them, life was simple. We baked cookies together, mixing flour and sugar while giggling over the mess we made. We planted little flowers in the backyard and watched them grow, teaching them patience as the days passed. We had picnics in the park, chasing butterflies and blowing bubbles, and for those moments, I forgot all the sorrow that had brought me there. Their laughter was like medicine, soothing the cracks in my soul. One evening, as I was tucking them into bed, the little boy asked me something that caught me off guard. He looked at me with serious eyes and said, "Why aren't you our grandma?" I smiled through the lump in my throat and told him gently, "Because families are made in many different ways, sweetheart, and sometimes love makes a family even if it doesn't look like it on paper." He seemed satisfied with that answer, but those words stayed with me. Love makes a family. I had lost the family I thought I would have, but I had been given another, one that was not mine in the traditional sense but was real nonetheless. In the quiet moments after they fell asleep, I often sat in the living room and thought about how strange life is. I had once prayed for children of my own, but those prayers were never answered in the way I expected. Instead, I had been given the chance to care for these two little souls, and maybe that was God's way of answering me differently. Maybe this was my purpose all along. Over time, I noticed their mother watching me more closely. She saw how her children clung to me, how their eyes lit up whenever I walked in, how their little hearts trusted me so deeply. I could see both gratitude and guilt in her eyes. Gratitude, because she knew I loved them and cared for them well. Guilt, because she knew she had once broken me and now I was helping to hold her family together. We did not speak much about the past, but sometimes the silence between us said everything. She once told me, "You're better to them than I ever expected anyone could be." I nodded, not knowing what to say, but inside I felt a strange mix of sadness and strength. Perhaps this was the strange twist of life. I had lost a husband and a friend, but I had gained something even stronger, a role that mattered deeply in the lives of two innocent children. And so, I continued. Day after day, week after week, I gave them my time, my patience, and my heart. And in return, they gave me back pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. The seasons in Florida do not change as dramatically as in other places, but I began to mark the passing of time through the growth of the children. They grew taller, their words became clearer, their questions more complicated. The little girl who once clung to her mother's leg began to run into my arms with confidence, and the boy who once asked why the sky was blue now wanted to know why people hurt each other and why some families looked different from others. His questions often cut deeper than he realized, and I would pause before answering, searching for the right words that would protect his innocence while also planting seeds of truth. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch eating popsicles to cool off from the heat, he asked me, "Did you know my mom and dad before I was born?" My heart skipped, but I smiled gently and said, "Yes, I knew them a long time ago." He studied me for a moment and then nodded as if that was enough, but inside I felt the sting of all the memories that simple question carried. The truth was complicated, but the children didn't need the full story. What they needed was love, stability, and kindness, and that I could give them freely. Their innocence reminded me to leave the bitterness behind because bitterness had no place in their lives. As I grew closer to the children, I also began to rediscover parts of myself that I had long buried. I remembered how much I loved singing old songs, so I taught them lullabies from my childhood. I remembered how much I loved baking, so we made pies and muffins, laughing as flour dusted our clothes. I remembered how much I loved storytelling, so I spun little tales at bedtime, weaving magic into their dreams. They became the reason I smiled again, the reason I got up with purpose every morning. And as much as I helped them, they were helping me even more, though they didn't know it. Still, I cannot pretend that everything was easy. There were moments of deep struggle, times when the past clawed at me. Watching him walk into the house after work, carrying the same tired look I once knew, stirred something inside me. I would remember the nights I had waited for him, hoping for his affection, praying for his attention. Now those memories came only as shadows, and I reminded myself that what was gone had no power over me anymore. The hardest moments were when I saw him show tenderness to the children, a tenderness I had once longed for. He would scoop the little girl into his arms or help the boy with his schoolwork, and I would feel both warmth for the children and sorrow for myself. It was a strange mixture of emotions, love and grief intertwined, but I carried it quietly. I never let it show, because the children deserved to see only stability from me, not the pain of my past. Their mother, my former best friend, continued to navigate her own struggles. Sometimes she seemed exhausted, weighed down by the responsibility of work, home, and family. At times, she would lean on me more heavily, asking me to stay longer, to cover weekends, to step in when she needed a break. I agreed because the children mattered most, but deep inside I also wondered if she ever truly understood what it cost me emotionally to be there. Perhaps she did, and perhaps that was why she often spoke with softness around me. There were even moments when she tried to mend the distance, offering me cups of coffee when she returned home, asking me how I was doing. I kept my answers simple. We were not friends anymore, but we were bound together by the children, and for their sake, I chose civility over anger. Some evenings, after leaving their house, I would sit alone in my little home and reflect on how my life had changed. I once imagined growing old with my husband, surrounded by children and grandchildren of my own, but that dream had been taken from me. And yet, here I was, living something different but still meaningful. It was not the family I had prayed for, but it was a family nonetheless. I began to believe that maybe life does not always give us what we ask for, but it gives us what we can use to grow. I thought often about forgiveness. Could I ever truly forgive them? Did forgiveness mean forgetting? Did it mean welcoming them back into my heart? I wrestled with these questions in prayer, asking God to guide me. Slowly, I began to see forgiveness not as a gift for them, but as a gift for myself. Holding on to anger chained me to the past, while letting go freed me to live fully in the present. Forgiveness did not mean I had to trust them again or erase what they had done. It simply meant I no longer allowed their betrayal to define me. This realization gave me peace, though it came gradually and with effort. One night, as I was saying good night to the children, the little girl asked, "Will you always take care of us?" My eyes filled with tears, and I told her, "As long as I can, sweetheart, I will always be here for you." Her small arms wrapped around my neck, and in that moment, I knew that no matter how my life had been broken, I had found something beautiful to hold on to. And so, my days continued, filled with the ordinary magic of caring for children, the unexpected grace of healing, and the quiet strength of choosing love even when life had given me every reason to be bitter. There came a point when I realized the children were not only shaping my days, they were reshaping me as a person. I had walked into their lives burdened by grief, bitterness, and betrayal, yet through their innocence I found myself becoming gentler, softer, and strangely stronger. They taught me lessons I never expected to learn at this age. The little girl taught me patience, for she was spirited and sometimes stubborn, quick to cry when she didn't get her way, but also quick to laugh when the world seemed too heavy. The boy taught me curiosity again, for his questions never ended, and he made me see the world with wonder instead of weariness. Together, they reminded me that even broken hearts could still beat with love if we let them. As they grew older, their trust in me deepened. They began to tell me secrets, the kind only children whisper when they feel safe. The boy once told me he was afraid his parents might stop loving each other because he heard them arguing at night. My heart ached for him, but I held his hand and said softly, "Even when parents argue, it doesn't mean they stop loving you." His eyes searched mine, and I prayed silently that my words gave him comfort. The little girl told me she wanted to be just like me when she grew up, and when I asked her why, she said, "Because you make everyone feel better." I nearly cried at her words, for I had never thought of myself that way. I had only been trying to survive, yet somehow, in the process, I had become a source of comfort for someone else. Life is strange like that. The parents, too, began to see how much I mattered in the children's lives. My former best friend often thanked me, her voice softer than before, her eyes sometimes glistening with something like regret. I could tell she carried guilt, though she rarely spoke it aloud. One evening, she said quietly, "I know I hurt you, and I can't change it, but I hope you know I'm grateful for everything you do." For a moment, I wanted to let all the pain spill out, to tell her how deeply she had wounded me, but instead I simply said, "I do it for the children." That was the truth, though deep inside I knew there was more to it. I did it for them, yes, but I also did it for myself, because caring for them gave me back the purpose I thought I had lost forever. My ex-husband was harder to read. He kept his distance, polite but reserved. There were times when I caught him watching me with the children, and in his eyes I thought I saw something he would never admit, perhaps regret, perhaps shame. He never apologized, not once, but I learned I did not need his apology anymore. I had moved beyond it, even if he hadn't. The healing was mine to claim, and I was no longer waiting for him to give it to me. One Sunday, after church, I took the children with me to the beach. The sand was warm beneath our feet, the waves rolled gently, and the salty air filled our lungs. We built sandcastles, chased seagulls, and collected seashells. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I sat with them and felt a peace I had not known in years. For the first time since the betrayal, I realized I was genuinely happy. Not happy in the way I once dreamed of being, with a husband beside me and children of my own, but happy in a new and unexpected way. The children had become like my grandchildren, though not by blood, and they had given me a joy I thought had been stolen from me forever. That night, as I tucked them into bed, the boy looked up at me and said, "I wish you could live with us all the time." His words pierced me, not with pain but with tenderness. I kissed his forehead and told him that I would always be there when they needed me, no matter what. And in my heart, I knew it was true. I might not live in that house, I might not be their mother or grandmother, but I was part of their lives in a way that mattered, and that was enough. Slowly, forgiveness began to grow inside me, not as a grand gesture but as a quiet release. I no longer carried the heavy weight of anger every time I looked at their parents. I no longer replayed the betrayal in my mind like an old song. Instead, I focused on the children, on the laughter we shared, on the love that had blossomed in the most unlikely place. Forgiveness, I realized, was not for them, it was for me. It was the key that unlocked the chains of bitterness and set me free. As the children grew, I knew the questions would come, questions about the past, questions about me, questions about love and betrayal. And when that time arrived, I hoped I would have the wisdom to answer with truth but also with grace. For now, it was enough to live in the present, to treasure the small hands that reached for mine, the voices that called my name, the hugs that wrapped around me without hesitation. My story had not gone as I once planned, but perhaps it had gone as it was meant to. Life had taken me through pain, but it had also given me a second chance to love, and in that love, I found healing. As the years went by, I watched the children grow before my very eyes, and with every passing season I realized more and more that life, though it had broken me once, had also blessed me in ways I never expected. The boy who once clung to my hand at the park grew taller, his shoulders broadening, his voice deepening, and soon he was telling me about his dreams of becoming a teacher. The little girl, once so tiny she fit perfectly in my lap, blossomed into a spirited young lady who loved art and wanted to paint the skies she adored. Watching them become themselves was like watching flowers bloom in a garden I had tended with care, and though I was not their mother, I knew my fingerprints would remain on their lives forever. There were moments when I wondered how different things would have been if betrayal had never happened, if my marriage had survived, if my best friend had remained true. But those thoughts no longer haunted me, they passed through my mind like clouds, present but powerless. I had learned that clinging to the what-ifs only robbed me of the joy of what is. And what I had, standing before me, was something precious. The children often spoke of me as part of their family, introducing me at school events or community gatherings as if I were their grandmother. People would smile knowingly, perhaps remembering the scandal that once swept through our little Florida town, but their smiles carried no judgment anymore. Instead, they carried respect, admiration even, because they saw what love had built from the ruins of betrayal. I became known not as the woman who was left, but as the woman who stayed strong, the woman who chose to love anyway. And in that reputation, I found dignity I thought I had lost. One afternoon, when the boy was nearly grown, he sat with me on the porch and asked a question that brought tears to my eyes. He said, "Do you ever wish you didn't take care of us?" I looked at him, my heart swelling, and I answered honestly, "No, sweetheart. Taking care of you has been the greatest blessing of my life." He smiled, his eyes misty, and for a moment I knew he understood the depth of what I meant. The little girl, too, often reminded me how much I mattered to them. On her 12th birthday, she drew me a picture of our time together, the three of us holding hands, with the words written above, "Family is love." I framed it and placed it in my living room, a daily reminder that love does not always come in the form we expect, but it always comes in the form we need. Even their parents began to change over time. My former best friend grew softer, less defensive, and more open in her gratitude toward me. She often told me she could not have managed without my help, and though we never returned to being friends, there was a quiet truce between us, a mutual understanding that the past could not be undone but the present could still hold peace. My ex-husband remained a man of few words, but I noticed the way he watched me sometimes when the children laughed in my arms. Perhaps he saw the strength he had underestimated in me, perhaps he saw the love he had lost, but whatever he saw, it was no longer my burden. I no longer sought his recognition, his apology, or his approval. My healing had long since surpassed his power. Forgiveness had set me free, and I carried no chains when I walked through that house anymore. Florida's sunsets became my anchor through it all. Each evening, I would watch the horizon blaze with colors, reminding me that endings can still be beautiful. I would breathe deeply, letting the humid air fill my lungs, and I would whisper a quiet prayer of gratitude, not for the betrayal, not for the pain, but for the resilience, for the unexpected blessings, for the children who had brought laughter back into my life. And now, as I tell this story, I realize that my journey is not one of loss but one of redemption. Yes, I was left behind. Yes, I was betrayed by the two people I trusted most. But from that betrayal came a new chapter, one where I discovered strength I never knew I had, one where I found love in the eyes of children who called me their own, one where I became more than just a woman abandoned, I became a woman renewed. The scars remain, of course, they always will. But scars are not signs of weakness, they are proof of survival. They remind me of where I have been, but they do not dictate where I am going. And where I am going is forward, with love in my heart and peace in my soul. The children will grow, they will have lives of their own, and one day they may not need me in the same way. But I know they will carry pieces of me with them, just as I will carry them forever in my heart. And when I am old and gray, I will not measure my life by the betrayal that once shattered me, but by the love that rebuilt me. Because in the end, that is the truth of my story, he left me for my best friend, but instead of being destroyed, I found a new kind of family, a new kind of love, and a new kind of strength. And that, my dear, is a story worth telling.